Pick up your phone right now. Look at it. Processor running at billions of cycles per second. GPS satellite triangulation accurate to 3 meters. A camera that can identify faces. A screen refreshing 60 times every second. Now, imagine pulling that phone out of the sea after 2,000 years on the ocean floor, corroded into an unrecognizable lump of rust and salt. Would anyone looking at it know what it was? That is almost exactly what happened in 1901, off a small Greek island called Antikythera. And what divers pulled out of that wreck was not a phone. It was something that should not have existed at all. Something that, when scientists finally understood what they were looking at, forced an entire rewrite of the history of human technology. It was a computer, built 2,000 years ago. And the civilization that built it disappeared, taking the knowledge with it for 14 centuries. In the spring of 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers returning from North Africa were forced to shelter near the uninhabited island of Antikythera during a storm. One of them went diving and discovered a Roman shipwreck on the seafloor at a depth of about 45 meters. Over the following months, divers recovered a remarkable collection of artifacts: bronze and marble statues, glassware, jewelry, coins dating to around 60 BCE. But mixed in with the treasures was something nobody recognized: a lump of corroded bronze, roughly the size of a shoebox, broken into several pieces. Nobody paid much attention to it. It was set aside with the less important finds and sat in storage at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens for months before anyone looked closely. When researcher Valerio Stais finally examined it in 1902, he noticed something extraordinary. The corrosion had split the artifact apart, and in the gap, he could see what appeared to be a gear wheel, a precisely machined triangular-toothed bronze gear wheel in a Roman shipwreck from 60 BCE. Stais suggested it might be some kind of astronomical clock. Other archaeologists dismissed the idea immediately. The technology required to produce such a mechanism, they argued, simply did not exist in the ancient world. The artifact was labeled misidentified and essentially ignored for the next 50 years. Then, in 1951, British physicist Derek de Solla Price got access to the fragments. Price was not an archaeologist, he was a scientist trained to think about how things work. And over the following decade, using X-ray imaging technology that had not been available to earlier researchers, Price began to understand what he was actually looking at. The Antikythera Mechanism, as it came to be called, was not a clock. It was not a simple gear assembly. It was an analog computing device of extraordinary complexity, designed to calculate and display the movements of the sun, moon, and planets across time. It had at least 30, and possibly as many as 72, precisely machined bronze gear wheels. It had differential gearing, the same mechanical principle used in the axles of modern automobiles, allowing it to calculate the difference in the movements of two independent systems simultaneously. It had a spiral calendar dial on the back face running 4 complete rotations, tracking the 19-year metonic cycle, the astronomical cycle within which solar and lunar calendars realign. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses. It could display the position of the sun and moon in the zodiac on any given date. And according to the most recent research, it almost certainly displayed the positions of all 5 planets known to the ancient world as well. This was not a simple instrument. This was a programmable analog computer operated by turning a hand crank and accurate to within 1 day in 500 years. Let that number sit for a moment. 1 day in 500 years. Modern mechanical watches, produced with computer-controlled milling machines and synthetic lubricants and material science that ancient metallurgists could not have dreamed of, typically achieve accuracy within a few seconds per day. The Antikythera Mechanism, made entirely from hand-worked bronze alloy, lubricated with whatever was available in the ancient world, achieved a calendar accuracy that no purely mechanical device in Europe would match until the development of precision clockmaking in the 17th century. It was not just ahead of its time, it was ahead of its time by roughly 1,400 years. The eclipse prediction system built into the mechanism is worth examining in detail because it is perhaps the single most impressive feat of ancient engineering reasoning ever documented. On the back face of the mechanism, a spiral dial divided into 223 cells tracked what astronomers call the Saros cycle. The Saros cycle is a period of exactly 223 lunar months, approximately 18 years and 11 days, after which the geometry of the Earth, Moon, and Sun returns to almost exactly the same configuration. This means that any eclipse that occurs at a given point in the Saros cycle will be followed by a very similar eclipse exactly one Saros cycle later. Ancient astronomers had identified this cycle through centuries of patient observation. The Antikythera Mechanism encoded it mechanically. A small pointer moved around the spiral dial as the crank was turned, and when it reached certain marked cells, it indicated that an eclipse was due. The dial even included a smaller secondary cycle, the exoligmos cycle of 54 years, which corrected for the slight offset that accumulates across 3 Saros cycles. This was not approximation. This was mathematically precise mechanical computation, encoding over 5 centuries of accumulated astronomical observation into a handheld bronze device. The question of who built it has been debated since Price's initial analysis, but the strongest evidence points to the island of Rhodes. Rhodes in the 1st and 2nd centuries BCE was one of the greatest centers of scientific and mechanical knowledge in the ancient world. The philosopher Posidonius operated a school there. Ancient writers, including Cicero, described visiting Rhodes and seeing mechanical devices that could reproduce the movements of the heavens. Archimedes, the greatest mathematician and engineer of the ancient world, was known to have built similar astronomical mechanisms, and ancient texts describe them in terms that match the Antikythera mechanism almost exactly. The ship carrying the mechanism sank around 60 BCE, possibly en route to Rome, possibly as part of the cargo of spoils being transported after military campaigns in the eastern Mediterranean. Whoever built it, they were working within a tradition of mechanical sophistication that modern historians had no idea existed. Because the mechanism did not survive alone, modern analysis of the Greek text inscribed on its surfaces, thousands of characters covering nearly every available face of the device, reveals that it came with a user manual. The inscriptions describe how to operate it, how to read its displays, what the different scales represent, and how to interpret its eclipse predictions. This was not a prototype or an experiment. This was a manufactured product with documentation designed for an educated user who may never have met the person who built it. It was, in the most meaningful sense of the word, a consumer technology. Between 2012 and 2022, a series of new underwater expeditions returned to the Antikythera wreck site using technology unavailable to the original divers. The Return to Antikythera project, funded by an international consortium of research institutions, used mixed gas rebreather diving equipment to reach depths that surface supply diving could not safely access, and deployed underwater metal detectors and sediment scanning equipment across the full extent of the wreck field. The expeditions recovered hundreds of new artifacts, including additional bronze fragments that have not yet been fully analyzed. More significantly, the scanning revealed that the wreck site extends considerably further than originally mapped, and that large sections remain buried under several meters of sediment and rockfall. The full inventory of the ship has never been recovered. What was on it, and whether it carried additional mechanism components or even complete additional devices, remains an open question that future excavation may eventually answer. And then it disappeared. The Roman world absorbed the Greek scientific tradition in the 1st century BCE, but the specific mechanical knowledge required to build instruments like this one was fragile in a way that architecture and literature were not. It required master craftsmen, specialized tools, accumulated workshop knowledge passed from teacher to apprentice over generations. When the political and economic stability that supported that knowledge transfer broke down, first through the crises of the 3rd century CE, then definitively through the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, the knowledge died with it. Not because it was forgotten immediately, because the chain of transmission was broken. No one wrote down the complete manufacturing process. No training program survived. The workshops closed. The craftsmen died. And the next time Europe produced a mechanism of comparable complexity, it was the 14th century, and the people who built it had no idea that anyone had done it before them. Modern attempts to reconstruct the Antikythera mechanism have revealed just how extraordinary the original engineering was. A team at University College London completed the most comprehensive reconstruction attempt in 2021, using CT scanning data from all 82 surviving fragments to model the full mechanism in 3 dimensions. They discovered gear arrangements they hadn't expected, including a system for modeling the irregular motion of the moon across the sky, a motion caused by the elliptical shape of the lunar orbit that requires a specific pin and slot mechanism to reproduce mechanically. The ancient designers had not just modeled the average motion of the moon, they had modeled its actual irregular motion, the variation that makes eclipse prediction genuinely difficult, and they had solved it with a mechanical trick so elegant that the UCL team required months to recognize what they were looking at. We have found one Antikythera mechanism. Exactly one. In a single shipwreck. By accident. Because sponge divers were caught in a storm. The ancient texts tell us that similar devices existed. Cicero saw one. Archimedes built at least 2. If the mechanism could be mass-produced to the extent that one ended up as cargo on a commercial vessel, others existed. We have not found them. They are on the seafloor, or dissolved into the soil, or melted down for the bronze long ago by people who had no idea what they were destroying. Go back to your phone. The computer in your pocket represents the unbroken continuation of a technological tradition that was rebuilt from scratch in medieval Europe, having been erased almost completely in the centuries after Rome fell. The Antikythera mechanism is proof that another tradition existed before it, one that reached the same destination by a different route 1,400 years earlier, and then vanished so completely that for most of human history, no one even knew to look for it. If this changed how you think about what ancient engineers were actually capable of, let me know in the comments, and subscribe to Stone Age Engineers for more stories about the most extraordinary minds our species has ever produced.